Hi everyone, welcome to Real Science Challenge. I'm Kent Louie, science teacher and talking head. Talking about better practices we can do in science education and broadcasting from beautiful Vancouver, Canada. This is episode 76, and today I'm sharing a rubric I've used to mark student graphs more efficiently. It's a one-column rubric, and it's helped me mark student graphs faster than before because I'm not calculating and adding every single point they get and then giving them a mark out of 10 or 15 or whatever. Instead, I'm looking for 4 or 5 things that demonstrate whether a student can generate a graph proficiently. Now, demonstrate those 4 or 5 things and a student is proficient at graphing. If not, the student is developing or emerging at graphing. And it's also possible that a graph can exceed expectations too. But how do we get there? I'm going to break it down all in a second, but before I continue, handouts for this episode are available at realsciencechallenge.com/EP76, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, in a one-column rubric, I write down and assess criteria for what it means for a student to be proficient or emerging or developing or extending when it comes to a skill or standard. For example, when it came to graphing with my Science A students, my one-column rubric had this set of criteria. Students had to label axes. They had to have a consistent scale. They had to maximize the size of their graph. They had to have clear and ruled lines, like straight lines using a ruler, and they had to have clear labeling of different data sets when necessary. Now, students who met all this criteria were proficient in graphing. Anyone who fell short of that would be emerging or developing, with emerging being the lowest level. And anyone exceeding that would be extending. And how would you get there? Well, this would require students to correctly choose the appropriate type of graph to use, either a line graph or a bar graph or a pie graph that represents the data. Now let's look at an example, all right? So on a quiz, I had students graph average monthly temperature data for 2 different cities around the world. As per my instructions, I don't tell them which graph to use, either line graph or bar graph. I tell them just to choose the appropriate format. I do tell them though to label, to use a ruler and pencil, to provide a consistent scale and to maximize their graphs. All right, so now let's take a look at some examples. All right, so here is an example of an emerging graph. All right, so it's big graph, nice and neat, but notice there's no labels on the side. So it's actually unclear as to what's being represented on the X and Y axis. Plus, I don't know what the scale is. It could be going up by 2 or 3 or 10 because there is no labels. So this is an example of an emerging graph on my scale, on my column rubric, one-column rubric. Now here, an example of a developing graph. Labeling is nice and clear, right? Everything is there, consistent scale, but look how much room is left over. This student needs to maximize their graph. That's why this is developing to me. Here is an example of a proficient scale or a proficient graph. Clear labeling on the side, maximum graph, nice and neat. Everything that is stated on this rubric right here is actually in that graph that you just saw, everything here. That's why it's proficient. Finally, here's an example of an extending graph. All right, check it out. It's got clear labeling. It's got maximum size, but it utilizes a line graph, which is actually the appropriate format to use with regards to this temperature data that I'm asking them to graph. So by using this rubric right here, I was able to plow through 50 graphs in approximately 25 minutes. Now going forward, I'm going to try to develop more one-column rubrics for other science standards. And if you can share with me some of your one-column rubrics, that would be greatly appreciated. That's it for this episode. Please smash the like or subscribe button or leave a comment below. And handouts once again are at realsciencechallenge.com/EP76. Thanks for watching. Now let's talk science education again soon.